December 17th, 1944, somewhere near Iwila, Belgium. The morning was silent, except for the sound of a Jeep engine echoing through the frozen forest. 3 men sat inside, wrapped in heavy coats, their breath fogging up the windshield. The stars on their shoulders and the flags on their sleeves told one story, that they were American soldiers. But something wasn't quite right. At a small military checkpoint, Sergeant William Creel raised his hand, signaling the Jeep to stop. His face was raw from the cold, his eyes sharp from lack of sleep. The Battle of the Bulge had just begun, and whispers were spreading. Whispers about enemies wearing friendly faces. Creel stepped closer. "Password?" he asked. The driver hesitated. A moment too long. The sergeant repeated the question, his voice firmer this time. The men's reply came, in English, but something in their tone was off. It wasn't the accent. It was the rhythm. The words felt rehearsed. Then Creel noticed the weapons. Sten guns. British. No American patrol carried those. Within minutes, the 3 soldiers were disarmed, stripped of their gear, and handcuffed. Beneath their olive-drab uniforms, the truth was exposed: German field gray wool. The prisoners' names were Manfred Peruz, Gunther Billing, and Wilhelm Schmidt. All 3 were part of a secret German mission unlike anything the war had seen before. What these 3 men didn't know was that their capture would spark the most intense paranoia in American military history. The birth of a shadow army. 2 months earlier, October 22nd, 1944, deep inside Hitler's headquarters at Rassenburg, East Prussia, the Führer summoned one of his most dangerous officers, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny. Hitler's eyes, tired but burning with obsession, fixed on him. He spoke of a bold new operation, one that would rely not on strength or firepower, but on deception. Germany's situation was desperate. The Allies had landed in France, liberated Paris, and were now pressing toward Germany's borders. Hitler needed a miracle, something to turn back time, to recreate the lightning victories of 1940. That miracle, he believed, would begin in the dense, snow-covered forests of the Ardennes. The plan was codenamed Operation Walk am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge. But hidden within that larger assault lay a smaller, far stranger plan, Operation Greif, meaning Griffin. Its objective: infiltrate the American lines, capture key bridges over the Meuse River before they could be destroyed, and throw the Allied command into confusion. And to achieve this, Skorzeny's men would wear American and British uniforms. The man Hitler called his commando king. Otto Skorzeny wasn't just another officer. He was already a legend, tall, scarred from a fencing duel, with a reputation for pulling off impossible missions. Just a year earlier, in 1943, he had led the audacious raid to rescue Benito Mussolini from his mountain prison, landing gliders on a sheer mountaintop and flying the Italian dictator to safety. In 1944, he had kidnapped the son of Hungary's regent, forcing that country to stay in the war. To Hitler, Skorzeny was the embodiment of Nazi daring, a man who could twist chaos into strategy. And now, he was being asked to do something even bolder: create an army of ghosts, soldiers who could become the enemy. A plan that defied the rules of war. Skorzeny immediately recognized the risks. Under the Hague Convention of 1907, any soldier captured wearing the enemy's uniform could be executed as a spy. No mercy, no prisoner of war protections. Even Hitler's top generals hesitated. Field Marshal von Rundstedt and General Jodl warned that the plan could lead to mass executions. But Hitler waved off their concerns. He insisted the operation was legal as long as the men removed their disguises before actual combat. That single detail, before combat, would later determine who lived and who died. Within days, Skorzeny submitted his plans. He asked for 3,300 English-speaking German soldiers. On October 25th, an official order went out to every German unit on the Western Front. Volunteers with knowledge of the English language and American customs are required for a special operation. The Allies intercepted the order almost immediately and dismissed it as a trick. They couldn't believe the Germans would be so bold, so foolish. They were wrong. The recruits. By early November, thousands of volunteers began arriving at a secret training camp in Greifenweiler, Bavaria. They came from every branch of the Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, and SS, and most had no idea what they had signed up for. One young soldier, Fritz Priest, believed he was joining a translation unit. Instead, he found himself surrounded by barbed wire, forbidden to write home, and told to start acting American. Security was brutal. A man was shot just for describing too much in a letter home. When the purpose of the mission was finally revealed, many recruits were stunned, even amused. But laughter faded quickly once they realized what it meant. If captured, they would die as spies. Skorzeny's grand vision soon met cold reality. Out of 2,500 men assembled, only 10 spoke fluent, idiomatic English. Another 30 could hold a conversation. The rest barely knew yes and no. It was hopeless. Skorzeny joked bitterly that his men might pass for Americans only if seen from 100 meters at night. But the mission was too far gone to stop now. Becoming Americans. The chosen commandos were divided into small units, 5 to 6 men each, and given crash courses in everything American. They studied American rank badges, military slang, and the structure of Allied divisions. They watched Hollywood films and listened to captured radio broadcasts. They learned how to walk like Americans, relaxed, shoulders back, casual. How to smoke Lucky Strikes. How to chew gum. How to curse properly. They even practiced answering questions like, who plays for the Yankees? What's the capital of Illinois? And what's Mickey Mouse's girlfriend's name? Because to pass as American wasn't just about language. It was about culture. Those who couldn't speak English well were told to act sick, pretending to have dysentery if anyone approached, their excuse to avoid conversation. The equipment disaster. If the language situation was bad, the equipment crisis was worse. Skorzeny's men needed American vehicles, jeeps, trucks, tanks, and proper uniforms. But the German supply lines were collapsing. Instead of the 15 Sherman tanks he requested, Skorzeny received 5 Panthers, which his mechanics hastily disguised with fake Allied stars and olive paint. Even Skorzeny admitted they would only fool a very young American from very far away at night. The uniforms were a mess, some British, some Polish, even Russian. A few still had bloodstains. Others were summer issue, completely useless in the frozen Ardennes. It was improvisation at its most desperate and its most dangerous. The infiltrators take shape. Despite the chaos, Skorzeny pressed on. He formed Panzer Brigade 150, a special force built for deception. Inside it, he created elite commando teams. Einheit Stielau, named after Captain Ernst Stielau, one of his best English speakers. These teams would go behind enemy lines dressed as Americans, driving captured Allied jeeps, and create chaos. Mislead convoys, cut telephone wires, reverse road signs, spread rumors, redirect troops into ambushes that IT was psychological warfare disguised as routine patrols. And it terrified the German volunteers just as much as it would later terrify the Americans. The attack begins. By mid-December, the massive German offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, was ready. On December 16th, before dawn, over 200,000 German soldiers launched a surprise attack across an 80-mile front through the snow-covered Ardennes. American troops, exhausted and undermanned, were completely unprepared. Artillery lit up the forests. Tanks roared down narrow mountain roads. The Allies were thrown into chaos. In the confusion, Skorzeny's disguised teams slipped through the cracks. Dressed in American uniforms, they waved at Allied convoys, gave false directions, and disappeared into the trees. One team drove straight into an American-held town, calmly scouted the defenses, then left, only to send a U.S. supply convoy straight into the wrong road. For the first few hours, Operation Greif worked perfectly. But the illusion wouldn't last. The collapse. The success of Skorzeny's deception depended on one man, SS Commander Joachim Paper, whose tanks were supposed to break through the American front and reach the Meuse River quickly. But Paper's advance stalled. American resistance was fierce. The terrain was brutal. By December 17th, the same day Sergeant Creel stopped that suspicious jeep, the plan was unraveling. Without Paper's breakthrough, Skorzeny's disguised teams were stranded behind enemy lines, trapped in the chaos they had helped create. And once the Americans realized that German infiltrators were wearing U.S. uniforms, every checkpoint became a trap. December 18, 1944. The frozen forests of Belgium were no longer quiet. They were whispering, with rumors, fear, and suspicion. German infiltrators, dressed as Americans, had been caught inside U.S. lines. And suddenly, every soldier looked suspicious. The American army, hundreds of thousands of men, had no idea who they could trust. Operation Greif had achieved something far greater than its military goal. It had infected an entire army with doubt. Checkpoint madness. In the early hours of December 18th, the U.S. Army began setting up extra checkpoints on every major road. Each soldier passing through was questioned, not about his orders, not about his mission, but about America itself. Who's the president? What's the capital of Illinois? What team plays at Wrigley Field? The soldiers who gave wrong answers, or even hesitated, were detained at gunpoint. One young lieutenant from Texas was held for 2 hours because he said Brooklyn Dodgers instead of New York Dodgers. Another was arrested after he spelled Pittsburgh without the H. Thousands of American troops were stopped, searched, and interrogated by their own comrades. And the best part? This chaos was exactly what Skorzeny had wanted. The power of rumor. The Germans hadn't just crossed enemy lines. They had crossed into the American imagination. Word spread that the infiltrators were everywhere. They were changing road signs. They were blowing up bridges. They were pretending to be MPs, even generals. Then came the most dangerous rumor of all, that the Germans were planning to assassinate General Eisenhower himself. No one knew where this rumor started. Some say it came from a captured German who, under interrogation, bragged that his unit's target was the Supreme Commander. Others think it began inside Allied intelligence, a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. But by December 20th, it didn't matter. The story had taken on a life of its own. Eisenhower, the most important man in Europe, was suddenly a prisoner inside his own headquarters. The prisoner general. In Reims, France, General Eisenhower's headquarters, SHAEF, went into lockdown. Roads were blocked. Soldiers were ordered to wear identification at all times. Snipers were placed on rooftops. Every vehicle entering the compound was searched. Every officer, no matter how high-ranking, was questioned about his identity. Eisenhower himself was confined inside his headquarters for nearly a week. When he finally did travel, he was heavily guarded, sometimes disguised as a low-ranking officer. The Paranoia had reached the highest level of command. Meanwhile, American troops at the front began seeing spies everywhere. The wrong accent. At one checkpoint near Liège, a group of American MPs stopped a jeep carrying 4 officers. The men had proper papers, U.S. uniforms, and correct passwords. But the MP captain noticed something. One of the Americans pronounced lieutenant as lieutenant, British style. They were immediately detained. After hours of questioning, they were released, because they really were Americans. Born in Boston, educated in London. But for those few hours, they were guilty until proven innocent. Friendly fire and fear. The paranoia soon turned deadly. At one roadblock near Malmedy, a nervous sentry opened fire on an approaching jeep that didn't stop fast enough. 3 men were killed instantly, all American. In another case, a general's convoy was shot at by its own escort after one soldier thought he saw a German star on a passing jeep. It was just mud on the hood. Tensions were so high that soldiers began painting extra stars and flags on their vehicles, desperate to prove who they were. But it didn't help, because in the minds of American troops, anyone could be the enemy. Skorzeny's shadow. Back in Germany, Otto Skorzeny was watching the chaos unfold through intercepted radio reports. His mission, though tactically limited, had achieved strategic gold. His disguised commandos had caused a level of panic completely out of proportion to their size or success. In reality, fewer than 40 men had managed to slip behind enemy lines. Most were captured within days. Some were shot on sight, but their psychological impact, it rippled across the entire front. Skorzeny later wrote, "I had merely sent out a handful of men, yet the Americans deployed entire divisions to guard against ghosts." The captured commandos. As the paranoia grew, U.S. forces began capturing more disguised Germans. Many surrendered willingly, cold, starving, and terrified. Interrogations revealed the full scope of Operation Greif. But they also led to tragedy. Under international law, soldiers fighting in enemy uniforms could be executed as spies, and the Americans wasted no time enforcing that rule. At Henri-Chapelle, near the Belgian border, 3 German soldiers, Billing, Schmidt, and Perouse, were tried by a military court. The verdict was immediate: guilty of espionage. On December 23, 1944, they were taken to a small field, blindfolded, and shot by a firing squad. They were the first of many. Inside the American mind. For American troops on the front lines, these executions didn't bring relief. They brought more fear. Every soldier wondered, if the enemy can look like me, speak like me, drive like me, how do I know I'm safe? There were reports of soldiers shooting their own officers because they didn't look American enough. Others refused to take orders from anyone they didn't personally know. Entire units began using secret signals to identify each other, playing cards tucked into helmets, cigarette brands, even favorite songs. War had always been dangerous, but now it was uncertain. The muse that never fell. Despite all the confusion, Skorzeny's mission failed to achieve its main goal, capturing the bridges over the Meuse River. His disguised units, meant to guide German tanks through enemy lines, were trapped by the stalled advance of Joachim Paper's SS column. Without fuel, without reinforcements, and with American resistance hardening, the offensive began to crumble. By late December, Skorzeny ordered his remaining commandos to abandon their disguises and fight in standard uniforms. The fantasy of an invisible army was over. The cost of fear. When the Battle of the Bulge ended in January 1945, Operation Greif had accomplished little in military terms. But psychologically, it had left deep scars. Over 2,000 American soldiers have been detained on suspicion of espionage. Dozens of friendly fire incidents had occurred, and a generation of soldiers learned the cruel lesson that, in war, trust can be a liability. Even years later, veterans would recall the paranoia of those winter days, when every question, every glance, every voice could mean death. Skorzeny's capture. In May 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, Otto Skorzeny surrendered to U.S. forces in Austria. He was interrogated about his missions, including the infiltration of American lines. He admitted everything, proudly, even arrogantly, insisting that Operation Greif had been perfectly legal under the rules of war. The Americans didn't agree. He was charged with war crimes, specifically the misuse of enemy uniforms. But at his 1947 trial in Dachau, something unexpected happened. A British officer testified in Skorzeny's defense, explaining that Allied commandos had also used German uniforms in special operations. The tribunal ruled that Skorzeny's men had removed their disguises before combat, and therefore hadn't violated the law. He was acquitted, a legacy of shadows. After his release, Skorzeny vanished into the chaos of post-war Europe. He later surfaced in Spain, working as a military advisor, a mercenary, and, allegedly, for secret intelligence networks. But Operation Greif remained his most infamous creation. A mission that used language as a weapon, identity as a disguise, and fear as a battlefield. It proved that in modern warfare, the mind is as vulnerable as the body, and that sometimes the most dangerous soldier is the one who looks like your friend. May 1945, Austria. The war was over. The Reich had fallen, and amid the ruins of a shattered Europe, one man, tall, confident, unmistakable, stepped forward and surrendered. Otto Skorzeny. To his captors, he was no ordinary officer. He was Hitler's favorite commando, the mastermind of impossible missions. The man who had rescued Mussolini, kidnapped Hungarian royalty, and turned war itself into theater. But now, stripped of his rank and his power, he faced a different battlefield, a courtroom. And this time, survival would depend not on weapons, but on words. The trial at Dachau. In 1947, Otto Skorzeny stood before an Allied military tribunal at Dachau. The charges were severe: violation of the laws of war, for ordering soldiers to fight in enemy uniforms during Operation Greif. If convicted, the sentence was death. The courtroom was tense. The prosecutors painted Skorzeny as a war criminal, a man who had blurred every moral line for Hitler's glory. They showed photographs of captured Germans wearing U.S. uniforms and testimonies from American officers who had watched those men executed as spies. But Skorzeny, calm, articulate, even charming, defended himself with precision. He claimed his men only used American uniforms for infiltration and reconnaissance, not for direct combat. Then, in a twist no one expected, a British commando officer, Major Yo Thomas, a former SOE agent, testified for the defense. He admitted that the Allies had used the same tactic during secret missions in occupied France. The courtroom fell silent. In the end, the judges declared Skorzeny not guilty. He walked out of Dachau a free man, or so it seemed. The prisoner who wouldn't stay. Though acquitted, Skorzeny remained in internment at a denazification camp near Darmstadt, awaiting further review. He spent his days writing, drawing sketches of commando raids, and planning his future. But patience had never been his strength. On the night of July 27, 1948, Skorzeny vanished. He walked out of the camp dressed in an American officer's uniform, the same disguise that had made him infamous. Guards saw him leaving, saluted him, and let him pass. He never returned. For years afterward, newspapers around the world reported sightings. Madrid, Buenos Aires, Cairo, Damascus. Each story added to the legend. Otto Skorzeny, the Nazi commando who had escaped justice and become a soldier of fortune. The Ghost of Madrid. By the early 1950s, Skorzeny resurfaced in Spain, protected by General Francisco Franco's fascist regime. In Madrid, he lived like a celebrity among exiled Nazis, former SS officers, industrialists, and intelligence agents who had fled post-war Europe. He opened an engineering firm, attended lavish parties, and posed for photographs with admirers who called him Europe's most dangerous man. But behind the wine glasses and handshakes, another life was unfolding. Skorzeny was working as a military consultant, advising foreign governments and paramilitary groups on guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and psychological warfare. Egypt hired him to train its special forces and early rocket scientists. Argentina sought his help in modernizing its army. Rumors spread that he even advised Juan Perón personally. His expertise wasn't ideology anymore. It was business. And war, as always, was his currency. The Mossad connection. Then came one of the strangest chapters of all. In 1960, Israeli intelligence, Mossad, launched Operation Damocles to hunt Nazi scientists working for Egypt. They needed inside information, and according to declassified reports decades later, they turned to the unthinkable, Otto Skorzeny himself. The story remains shrouded in mystery, but multiple accounts suggest Skorzeny, fearing assassination, agreed to cooperate. In exchange for being removed from Israel's hit list, he allegedly provided details about German scientists helping Egypt build rockets. If true, the man once loyal to Hitler had now worked, even briefly, for the state of Israel, the ultimate irony of his life. When asked later, Mossad officers reportedly said, "He was useful, and when we were done, he disappeared again, like a ghost." The myth grows. Throughout the 1960s, journalists hunted Skorzeny across continents. Some found him living quietly on a ranch near Madrid. Others claimed he was in Latin America training mercenaries. Every photograph, every rumor added another layer to the myth. He was called Hitler's commando, the devil's captain, the man who never lost a mission. Hollywood came knocking. Skorzeny's name inspired villains in films, novels, and spy thrillers. The archetype of the charming, dangerous Nazi officer who outsmarted everyone. Yet behind the legend, there was only an aging soldier, a man haunted by the ghosts he had created. Reflections of a commando. In his later years, Skorzeny wrote memoirs titled My Commando Operations. In them, he described his life not as that of a villain, but as a soldier following orders, a patriot, not a fanatic. He defended Operation Greif as a necessary deception, a tactical experiment in the chaos of war. He claimed he never killed prisoners, never carried out atrocities, and never regretted his actions. But historians disagreed. Documents revealed that while he may not have pulled the trigger himself, his missions often supported the machinery of Nazi aggression, from the rescue of Mussolini to the suppression of uprisings in Eastern Europe. The line between genius and guilt blurred, just as it always had in his life. The final years. By the early 1970s, Skorzeny's health was failing. He suffered from lung cancer but refused to slow down. Even as he grew weaker, he continued advising foreign clients, giving lectures, and entertaining journalists eager to meet the man who had once terrified the Allies. In 1975, Otto Skorzeny died in Madrid at the age of 67. His funeral was attended by hundreds, old comrades, fascist sympathizers, curious onlookers, and even intelligence officers from several nations. As his coffin was lowered, veterans of the Waffen-SS gave the Nazi salute, a gesture banned but not forgotten. The man who had lived his life in disguise left the world the same way he had entered it, under a symbol of deception and defiance. The legacy of fear. Narrator, soft, reflective. History remembers Otto Skorzeny not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of how far men will go when war strips away morality. Operation Greif was his masterpiece, a plan that turned identity into camouflage, language into a weapon, and fear into victory. It didn't change the outcome of the war, but it changed how wars would be fought forever. Today, special forces around the world still study his tactics. Infiltration, psychological manipulation, asymmetric warfare, though rarely in his name. Because Skorzeny's brilliance can't be separated from the darkness that fueled it. He was the architect of illusion, the commando who made truth itself a casualty. Epilogue: the man behind the mask. Closing scene: solemn piano, fading wind. In the end, Otto Skorzeny lived longer than the empire he served. He outlived Hitler, Himmler, and the world that made him famous. But his legend, like all dangerous legends, refused to die. In every war since, whenever soldiers were the enemy's uniform, whenever deception replaces firepower, and whenever paranoia takes hold, the shadow of Operation Greif rises again. Because one man proved that on the battlefield of the human mind, truth is the first casualty. And that man was Otto Skorzeny, the man who fooled the world.